it's really been nice working with you. Well, we haven't really started to work together, but we wanted to work together. And I do remember reading your book, your first book, Hans, on Data Vault, and being surprised at the applications of using the data vault approach. There was everything from master data to data quality and things like that. And so my eyes were certainly opened in the benefit that we can get from having these different areas and bringing the data and not always focusing on the entire data bond, but really the concepts and the relationships. And then the satellites help us conclude all of the modeling that we require. So really look forward to it. I know you guys have progressed a lot. And we do have a few people on the call at the moment that are very interested. And I think the initial interest was on the certifications, but I certainly have found it very exciting or interesting to listen to the ELM. And I don't think that's a certified, if I'm correct, Hans, but I'm sure you'll deal with it. And then also the advanced data vault modeling. So Hans, thank you, and Remco, thank you so much for sharing your information and your understanding with us. All yours.
Well, thanks for having us here. We really appreciate it. It's always good to connect up, and I feel like we are really kind of working together. We've met so many times and chatted so much, but you're right. I think now is really the time to kick in and have some fun together. So I look forward to that. The Elm. It's interesting because you mentioned the book. When I was working on the book back in the day, and I saw Stefan and Shane are on here too. This was back in the day, and at that time, it kind of occurred to me that there's something of a broader pattern here. Something that's beyond Vault, and it actually in back in that day, trying to come up with a name for it took me probably 3 months because it was all modeling names are already taken. But then eventually we I was discussing it with a few colleagues here and there, and then we came up with the idea, okay, this should be ensemble logical modeling forms, and actually that's kind of spawned into its first thing. But yeah, that has a little bit of a chapter or two in the original book from a decade and a half ago, but really is becoming more of a thing today. I think that's for sure. And you've seen the book that Remco put out about Elm, so it's really getting there now. But I think that's probably going to be more profound as we go forward, because that's really the direction that fits well with the current landscape of to be honest, I mean, pretty much the AI and what's happening with the development of code and creation of data warehouses. So, but yeah, we'll see how that all works. That'll be a fun ride too. So, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, Howard. And then what it is it may not look like presentation mode all the time, but that's okay. Once I go to presentation mode, I'm going to lose you. That is, I won't see you guys. So if you raise your hands or just interrupt me.
I'll do that for you, Hans. I'll interrupt. I'll monitor the chat, and I know Remco does as well. So we'll make an effort to make you aware of it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Just jump in and interrupt me. And I think that's for everyone that's on with us today as well, is that definitely please feel free to just jump in and interrupt at any time. That would be great. And then we'll carry the conversation wherever it goes. Yeah, for sure. I'm not sure if you guys can see everyone there, but how many people, I suppose, are already familiar with? I know there's a couple of people that, of course, are either in our consortium or have been through the certification training, but how many people are currently aware of data vault modeling versus not? There we go. I see some hands going up there. Of course, Anders, yeah. Hello. Okay, so excellent. Yeah, so it's looks like a little less than half, right? Except maybe a couple others I recognize too. Okay, cool. Well, that's great. So what's going to happen either way, I think here, is that we'll be starting with um, kind of the basics. I think what part of the reason for today's presentation is really, um, what problem are we solving? Why Vault, and why is it important to be trained and certified in Vault? And then we'll talk about what's coming up. Does that make sense?
Fantastic.
Okay. All right. Then I'm going to go ahead and go into presentation mode so you don't have to see everything else. There we go. Now, let's kick the start off here with issues and requirements of data warehousing in general. And by the way, these are ones that have been here, since the beginning. I would say there's not anything really shocking in this list. I bolded a couple of them. But obviously the first item that comes up is agility. And that's what's not so much common to other forms of modeling or other places where databases support our business. So in operational systems, or certainly a presentation layer, maybe that's not as important. Of course, in the presentation layer, you can start off something new. It doesn't have to depend on what was there before. And of course, in the operational systems, we build it to work a certain way for as long as we can make it work that way, which is great. But adapting to change like that is not necessarily the biggest thing. Having a business focus is huge. And that's part of the enterprise-wide scope. That's an issue that we have trouble with, is trying to get that view from a enterprise-wide and a business view. Being able to build incrementally is still today, it's right up on the top of the list. We can't really build the warehouse from day one and be done. We're going to be constantly adding to it as we go. And it's not just that the kind of waterfall approach to the whole warehouse is just scope-wise too big. It's also because the business is constantly changing. We're always adapting. So, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those things even in the last couple of months of what's been changing. Historization, auditability. These are, of course, part of the core definition from warehousing in the very beginning, tracking history and remaining auditable. Reengineering, time and cost. And I think this gets down to the question, if people ever ask, which is, what causes a data warehouse project to fail, right? And of course, if you're saying project, then we know that the number one thing that causes all projects to fail has to do with communication. But outside of that, the next one down the list would be reengineering, right? So in data warehousing, what really causes that enterprise, historized, integrated, auditable view, what really causes that to fail in the long term is going to be the cost and time associated with reengineering, complexity, cost, and time. So that's a huge one. Our ability or inability to land on common semantics has been a huge issue, and it still is. Hardening of the architecture, where it becomes difficult to change. And then, of course, the real game changer for data warehousing versus all other manner of data-oriented projects has to do with the profound need for data integration, which has a huge list of issues. So these are the challenges that we seek to address. And I think, of course, in this presentation, we're talking about what role does the modeling paradigm play in addressing these issues of data warehousing. So what it comes down to, yeah, what's that?
Yeah, I just wanted to, the DMBOK goes into quite a lot of detail about the comparison between the Kimball and the InMon approach. And of course, Kimball came out very strongly in terms of saying that the building an enterprise data warehouse takes too long, fails quite often, and we just don't have the luxury to build those type of systems. And when you mentioned agility, so we had InMon taking a long time, third normal form, building these intense databases, which I think you've listed here into the challenges of incremental re-engineering. And then we had Kimball that just took it straight from the transaction table and into the data mart and didn't really care about the possibility of multiple cubes saying the same thing. So
Hmm.
if you say agility, are you in between Inmon or Kimball, or you feel that you even better than the Kimball approach? Because most, I wouldn't say most people, but there are a lot of people that are still doing the Kimball, and that's what they live and die by. So how do you
Yeah,
position
for sure.
yourself in between?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I mean, I think that as we're going to see a little bit in the slides later, we'll talk about encapsulation. But for now, let's just barely touch on it. I think what ended up happening, and I think some of us were in the crew that lived through this process, right?
Mm.
Going from what was, I guess, attempted to be deployed with enterprise-wide with image techniques, which fell into third normal form, but weren't necessarily designed to be that way, right? And then, of course, what happened with the Kimball stuff at that time. And for sure, if you want to talk about agility and responsiveness is probably another good word. Um, the Kimball methods are awesome. They were a game changer because our ability to pull together data to learn about ETL back then was all it was. It was
Mm.
anytime you were mapping and creating pipes and transforming, it was all ETL back then. But we learned all that from these techniques, data integration and how to make this work with transformations into some kind of a FactDim. And then, of course, the tooling grew up alongside it. So our OLAP tools back then, like a
Yeah.
Cognos and such, were phenomenal. So yeah, but the problem, of course, is that what you're giving up in that space is going to have to do with the auditability, the enterprise-wide scope, probably even common semantics and things like that. What you don't have to worry about are things like agility and well, incremental build, but they were all kind of separate increments, really. Hardening of the architecture, not as big a deal until we got to the whole conformed dimension federated mart approach. And that really became, I mean, if we think back, that really came as a result of silos and data anomalies existing. And then so the answer was, well, to avoid those silos, then we need to have more of a central, and again, I'll use the term encapsulated concept for a dimension. That should be a, conformed dimension, should be type 2. It should act the same for all facts that use it. We'll federate the usage so that we can avoid the anomalies. But then as soon as you pushed into that, now we got into agility issues. And now we got into the re-engineering time. And then you got into the hardening of the architecture. And now it became more difficult to work with, just as it was with 3NF. So I think what really ended up happening is we were approaching techniques that we had used for something else. So we had, 3NF worked great for operational systems where you didn't have integration issues and things like that. I think the dimensional models work great for agility and for business purpose and for quick answers and really how to analyze data and what does it mean to have applications and systems built around how we go in and analyze and query and work with data and pivot. And so I think fascinating how well that worked and still does today, but it doesn't address the issue of the warehouse. So we just have to think of enterprise integration and data warehousing as its own category of data in
Mm.
this architecture that we have for our organization. And it has its own requirements and its own variables and constraints that need to be addressed. And so again, I think the secret there, as we'll see probably a little bit in the slide deck, is that secret has to do with decomposition and versus encapsulation. That's really the way to make it happen. So I don't know if that answers it more or less, but
Yes,
or
it does.
discusses it because yeah, I think we're bringing
Yeah.
it up for discussion, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. I had to pause that because it's hard not to see you Howard when I'm talking. So okay. Anyway, so really what it came down to, I guess we need now, or we do need, of course, a modeling pattern that's optimized for enterprise data, not for the other things we do. And so check the box. I mean, it's got to be agile. Okay, fair enough. we have to be able to have a business focus, and we'll get more into that too. But yeah, if we have integration across 20 or 200 different sources or subject areas, the focus for the enterprise view has to be business based. Support the enterprise-wide scope. And then, of course, easy to adapt to change, supports full bitemporal historization. And of course, there's a lot of nuance to how we historize data, and that needs to support all those manners that we might do it. Has to remain fully auditable, very low re-engineering time and cost. And then, of course, realistically support the common semantics of the organization, enable data integration, alignment, and reconciliation. By the way, this little phrase here is an important one. I think that actually is in the book too, Howard, is data integration in its fullest sense is really not possible, right? Because we have sources and we have subject areas and we have divisions and departments that they just have different semantics. They have different, not just semantics, but they manage to a different level of concept than, or an alternate concept than others do. So full integration across, apples and oranges is not necessarily there, but what we deem data integration really has to do with integrate everywhere you can, and then you have an alignment with how these things relate to each other so we can understand how they're different, and then we have to be able to reconcile those differences. And I think that's an important thing about integration. Yeah, go ahead.
So a simple example would be, and I mean, everyone talks about this as the different definition of customer, and getting that alignment. So that's what you're referring to here, is that, we may not be able to enforce a single customer, or we may get funny and try to build a party.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think I would say that, not to get in the heads of all the people that did this back in the day, but you're right. I think that what pushes us to the generic abstractions is really the idea that we can't get common definitions. And I think part of that is just we're, aiming at the wrong goal here. It's a matter of allowing for business units nuanced definitions, but then being able to align these so that we can say, okay, well, when you say customer, you're not including the ones that, haven't bought anything for 2 years or whatever, whereas we do. And then, or we say client, it means something, or whatever the terminology is. But instead of saying everyone interpret this the same way across the organization, we're saying we recognize that for business purposes that are valid, you need to interpret them slightly differently. And we accept that. We can work with you on that. So yeah, it's this by the way, I think those of us that are on this call right now, I mean, any of you that have the interest, you could go in and we could probably write, book after book just on that topic alone, I think. Okay, fair enough. The audience might be small because that's fair, but yeah. But still, there's a lot to unwrap in that area for sure. Fluid and adaptable architecture, of course, and the model itself is fluid and adaptable. I think that's really important in it. And so there you go. I think if you were to, put your brain on it, there's probably a few more things that come into play here, but this really speaks to a lot of it as far as how we need to be able to address it. So let's get into the solution in a nutshell. And what is it that's going to solve this issue for us? And by the way, we're going back now, a couple decades, right? Because Vault has been around now for quite a while, but this is what it's aiming for. I kind of, again, this comes from the book, but it's unified decomposition. This is kind of like that oxymoron, right? The combined thing that's split apart, right? It doesn't make much sense from some perspective, but for agility, and this is the thing, for agility, like being able to adapt to change and whatever, build incrementally, It would be helpful if data from new systems or other changes to our current data feeds did not require the reengineering of our target tables, right? That we could split them out into smaller parts, and that's the decomposition. And for those of you that lived through the, hey, we have conform dimensions, but then later we start splitting them up and create many dimensions, right? With factless fact. Back in the day, there's a natural, I would say, gravity in addressing these issues in enterprise data warehousing that call us to want to split these out, right? And in the dimensional techniques, that gravity, that like latent need to split things up to solve our problem, is what causes data silos, And again, but then if you really were thinking about it deeply, you'd say, yeah, I get it. We're not supposed to have silos, but man, that pressure to want to split things up to make it more agile is a pretty strong pressure. Why is it there all the time? Why do we feel this need to split it, right? And so it really came down to pondering, you know, can can we split it, right? And at the same time have it act and behave as if it were an encapsulated concept, and so that we wouldn't have these anomalies and these silos. So it's this kind of a dual force thing, right? We're saying at the same time, we want to avoid the data anomalies arising from silos. So we want the tables to be seen as if they're tied together, unified. And, if you look at these pictures on here, an entity, and this is in third normal form on the left side, an entity in third normal form is encapsulated. I mean, if you take your first, even Dembach, if you take your first couple hours of anything in data modeling, you're going to learn about key dependency, because the key dependency in an entity is the secret to the whole picture, right? I mean, that's it. I mean, we have to have that. So in the long term, this is what allows us to be successful in relational database management systems and all things that are now behaving like them, whether they are or not, like SQL-esque interfaces. If you can't have a key with the attribution and also tied relationships, the one relationship cardinalities, into an entity sitting under a key, then we can't control that one relationship we need, right? In other words, you put an entity has a key, and if I put a field for first name, I want to make sure there's only one first name. I don't want 17 first names, right? That doesn't help me. I want to have the one. And when you go and have a transaction and you refer to the key of this table, you want it to return one and only one record. I mean, this is just, again, 3NF, modeling class, first hour of class, right? That's it. Dimensions, the same thing, because now we're saying, of course, even with many dimensions to be, maybe there's 17 of them, but each one of them has a key and everything in there depends on the key. Now there are some, of course, we roll in the outliers, so we might be breaking pure third normal form in a lot of that, but still an attribute in there can be seen as an attribute that does describe the key. And so again, if I had the customer like a person and I have a first name, there's only going to be the one first name in there. That's fine. It is. But also, if that person also was driving 3 different vehicles, I might have rolled in something as an outlier from there. It depends on how what your approach is and how you pivot. But anyway, the basic concept of encapsulation is the same. But so now we're splitting it apart. And I think this comes down to what Vault does. And again, for those of you that know Vault already, there's probably, I don't know, was a third or so of the group. Basically, how things work is that we create an ensemble, and this is where the term ensemble comes from, which refers to that person, place, thing, event that we were modeling in the entity or in the dimension. But because we're splitting apart tables, we still have to have a name for that grouping, right? That grouping is now, say it's customer. If there's a customer table that's an entity in third normal form and a dimension, customer dimension, it would be a customer ensemble, right? Because the pieces together should act that way, as if they were everything I need for a customer. They are conforming to a single key, a single instance that is seen in the hub. So the components for the Data Vault ensemble are going to be the unique instance, the key itself, like your primary key, if it was 3NF, or your dimensional key, if it's, including your timelines. Your natural business relationships are in links. And then, of course, the satellite has all context and all history, so that we're splitting those out from each other. Real quick, to point it out, the ensemble, again, is the combination of them all, the ones that act together, kind of like you picture an ensemble in music, right? You have these things work together in concert. Event, person, place, thing. They should be business driven, business facing. That comes from the requirements of enterprise warehousing. And there's one hub, directly attached satellites, and related links that can be seen as part of that concept. The hub itself, just a key. So basically, if you were to go past the data warehouse required attribution, some kind of an enterprise-wide key that's maintained as the actual constrained key in the warehouse itself. And then, of course, the date timestamp of when it is loaded, or an inscription date we refer to it now, and then also an audit ID from where did it come from. But if you kind of consider those separately, it's just the key itself. There's no context and no relation in the hub. We don't need to make this table form have anything but the key. And then that's great, because now everything else can depend on it. So the links will be constructed by combining those instances of the keys from the concepts, which makes sense. All relationships are now existing, living outside of the ensemble hub structure itself. Now you could say, again, the ensemble will take on, where it has a one relationship, it will logically take on the relationship to this link. But all the foreign key constraints occur in the links. The only other place you're going to find it is in the key to the construct of the satellite to its own hub. So that's it. And this is also just a combination of keys. And so there's no other part of a key for a link. In other words, it doesn't include, for example, a date timestamp for validity. It doesn't include context to say if it's current or not. It includes nothing but just the foreign key constraint itself embodied in a table. So that's pretty straightforward. And then really the hardest working concept here, or component construct, is going to be the satellite, where all the context and history lives. And that's an interesting way to put it. But if you consider historization as change data capture, right, where if something changes, I'm going to end date the prior record and insert a new one with a new effective date. If that's how you consider it, the only construct here doing that is a satellite. The hubs and links are just load once, and they're never touched again. There's no timelines associated with them. If I need to speak to timelines of the instance of a concept, I have to do that in the satellite. So those, again, quick overview of the parts. For those of you who have not seen this before, just want to give the quick overview and kind of like, this is, what they look like. The important picture is this, and I still maintain this is probably the most important. I always tell people in class, if you take a picture of this, or just take this and print it and put it up on your wall, you're probably going to do okay with Vault modeling, because the ways that we stray from our patterns, and to be sure, if we stray from our patterns, it's going to add some complexity, at a minimum complexity in interpretation of what it is we have in our model, and possibly also complexity in how we use it and work with it, right? But if you're trying to take advantage of both the conformity of being under a key, like a conformed dimension, where we have the one instance, that means we won't have data anomalies and silos. That means we can remain agile. If you want to take advantage of that, then we should follow this pattern as fully as is humanly possible. And ultimately, when you deploy, as is practical, because of course, there's going to be practical considerations in deployment that may impact your, what do they say? Results may vary, right? This is one of those things, disclaimer from the attorney. But for the most part, the closer you to say this pattern, the better. And what it means is if you were somehow to consider that there's an act of decomposition. In other words, if I have defined through MDM or some other manner, here's a customer concept, and it's conforms to a third normal form theory. In other words, everything in this table depends directly on the key of that table. And if there's a foreign key in there, it's representing the one relationship it has to something else. Then if I were to practice an actual like decomposition as a verb, which is not how we approach it, but if you were to do this, then you would say, well, take the key and make it a hub, and take the context and split it across satellites, and then jettison the relationships and put your foreign key constraints in tables called links. That's it. That's how it should work. But here's the magic. You ready? If that's true, then any of you should be able to pick up somebody else's data vault, right? And then grab a hub and say, okay, if I take this hub and I roll in all the attributes from the satellites around it and put it into one table, and I look at those links and I say, are you a one relationship? Yeah, you are one relationship. I want your foreign key. And then you bring that in. If you do that and you kind of tape together this construct that looks like an encapsulated table, it should conform to the theories of third normal form, or at minimum a dimension. Again, like I said, you might roll in some outliers here, but let's not get carried away with that. But it should basically fit. If it doesn't, what's happened is that somehow you've taken that satellite and made it its own concept, its own entity. Somehow you've taken that link and made it its own concept or entity. As soon as you do that, we've basically broken this pattern. Now you're going to say, okay, well, there's two sides to this. One is our guidance is clear. Don't break this pattern. Well, you can still go in and find people that have broken it through some different common things. And if you get deeper in, you'll know. Those of you that have been doing this for a while, you know which ones they are. It's multi-valued, it's LSAT, it's different things. But okay, fair enough. There's some iterations. There are always going to be hopefully a logical and clear-minded, aware decision as to what and why you're doing that. But as a general rule, just don't do it. It's certainly not when you're starting out. So let's take a look at what that means. Like if we're looking at, in this case, what I've got is an entity on the left. I've got a type 2 dimension conformed on the right, and I have a vault in the center. And actually the attribution in the keys and everything in each of these three different areas, the left, the middle, and the right, is the same. Okay, so if I were to take, for example, mobile phone number, I have a mobile phone number in the entity called customer entity. I also have a mobile phone number in the version that's data vault and in the type 2 dimension, right? And actually, if you look through, you'll see that, again, all the attribution here is effectively the same attribution, right? It's just the same model seen in with three different paradigms. Here's the fun part. The magic of third normal form, right, is right there. The magic of third normal form is that if mobile phone depends on the key of customer, it must be in the table. It must be inside that entity where the key dependency exists, the one-to-one. You can't put it somewhere else. Well, you shouldn't. You can have one-to-one relation. Depends on the type of data. But for the most part, depending on the key, this particular key, if it describes it, that's where it belongs. If it's based on another key, it doesn't belong there. That's pretty straightforward, right? And the same thing is true if you go to the dimension. For any one record, given a timestamp, you might have 5 records in here for different time slices. But for any one of those records, it's a one-to-one relation within that instance, one record within that table. It has to be. Well, then guess what? here's where you have to maintain that one-to-one as well with the attribution in a satellite. This right here is one of the hardest things that you will face, because as soon as you create a separate table, in your mind, you know it doesn't actually have to be, right, that relationship, because you can make it be whatever you want. Of course you can. It's its own table. But if you want to maintain the integrity of this, the auditability, the key constraint, avoid the anomalies, avoid the silos, it then must depend on the key in this case. It must depend on that key. Now, of course, you can say that technically from the hub to the SAT is a many relationship. Well, that's fair, because that's true up here too with the type 2 dimension, right? You have a one customer code, in this case, it might be unique, has a many relationship to the number of instances in the type 2 dimension. And that's only because of date time. At any one point in time, it's a one-to-one relation. At any one point in time, it can only be a one-to-one relation. That's true of, I mean, we've been doing type 2 dimensions since what, 97? Whatever, 92, 93? I don't know, whatever it is. It's not like this is a foreign idea to us. We understand that we're talking about for one time slice, there can only be one. That's what we've done for 30 years or more. So that's not a surprise, right? We're saying do that same thing. And this is where it becomes important to look at it. So yeah, so this again picture of, can you understand how to split by key, the instance itself, by the context, and of course by the relationships, and then also keep the rule set of key dependency. And this, by the way, is the reason why there was head inversion. There's a reason why there's anchor. There's a reason why it's focal point modeling, because they're all tied to the same theory of this unified decomposition of an ensemble, right? That's all tied to that same theory. So makes perfect sense. And now you can imagine new context, add a new satellite. We don't have to, you know, re-engineer the prior, right? And like this picture will show, again, we want to do this. I guess it's not a person's name. It could be as if, if you know my friend as if, right? As if is my friend who says it's as if, as if it was in the same table, right? You're going to design these satellites as if they were in the same table underneath the key, because they are. It's the same dependency as we've had before, right? It's really important to keep that. What does it mean? It means, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead. You have a question.
There's a question from William.
Yeah, please.
He asks, how do we deal with data migration from multiple businesses and their separate legacy stores to the vault, given that each business legacy system may have their own referential integrity constraints?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you're talking about, there's two theories there, right? Or two topics there. One is going to be the one time, right? Where you're moving from a different form of warehousing into this new space, right? Into this new form of modeling. So it's kind of like that one time, migration from one to another. And of course, in that case, you're going to have some decisions to make about how you deal with historical time slicing and how you move forward. By the way, if you were going to a newly modeled conformed dimensional environment, you would have that same discussion to a large degree, right? If it's a different platform altogether, how do you do that migration and bring it across? But you'll have to decide how you deal, especially with time slices and such, when you make that move across. If we're talking about it on a more day-to-day basis, a new system rolls in, and that system says, I view the attribution or the concepts in a different way, then you're going to have alignment across concepts potentially, and or you have multiple instances of the same concept and they're under different keys, in which case we have same as link. If you go across from two different concepts that are the same but slightly different, if it's important to keep both, you can have, again, links in between there to show that they're aligned. And then, of course, with context satellites, you can have more raw-facing context satellites, and you can also have more business-facing ones. So you could have a set of additional satellites required for keeping other forms of context and then determine which one is going to be your gold record, for example. I don't know if that's what you were asking, Howard.
William, so that was from William. So William, you may, as I was saying, you could bring in a satellite to the system and then consolidate that later on in another satellite. Yeah. William, is that answering your question?
Yeah.
Yes, it does. Thanks, Howard. I'm coming in as a bit of a novice on this one, right?
Okay. No problem. That's what.
Cool.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, that's cool. And I think what you're going to find, by the way, William, is that a lot of the challenges we're talking about are going to be ones that, of course, are innate to data warehousing itself, right? So how do you do it in any form? I think the decomposition here and the ability to align without re-engineering either construct. In other words, the links can be just added because they're just plucking keys and connecting them, right? So you can do, exploration and what if links if you wanted to. Likewise, like Howard was saying, you can put together a satellite and run it and say, yeah, I like this one, or I don't, and I'm going to consolidate this with something else, or I'm going to split it apart a different way. And in these cases, typically what we would do is it would be additive, and then the other one would fall off eventually like a dying leaf if you're not using it. But again, for auditability, you probably want to, depends on your organization, but you might want to maintain the old artifacts. But it's kind of a living, breathing, adapting form. And I think that's what's important here is we're not basing it on the idea of hardening. And when we do the decomposition, like in what would happen in many dimensions, and then it's a permanent isolation, right? It's then if we want to tie them together, we're on the outside going, oh yeah, did you know that the customer key code over here, which has its own identity and its own life, I should be considering to be the same as this one has its own identity, its own life. I think anyway, you'll find as you go further along with it, it's the flexibility of it that makes it really happen. And the sentence on this slide is interesting too, because data vault means thinking differently. And I can say that it's going to feel like, as one of my favorite sayings now, it's going to feel like we're petting the cat the wrong way. But in the end, what you're going to realize is that we've been trying to, before Vault and Ensemble, we were trying to apply patterns that didn't fit the business case we were working with, i.e. data warehousing and all its requirements. And that really, given the warehouse, this is what we want to use. By the way, interesting to note, I would never use Data Vault for an operational system because it would fail miserably in that role, right? Where the idea is to lock down business requirements and codify it, and then have those business rules be managed in large part by the data structures themselves, because that does require hardening, and it should be done that way. So again, Vault would pretty much fail there, and if you get into the class, I think one of the most profound things, I shouldn't say that, I'm writing a bunch now on just the topic of natural business relationship, because when we relate tables in third normal form, we have to use specific cardinality or degree of relationship, wherein we can't have a situation where it's many to many, but it can be one to many, one of course to one, optional, whatever it could be. But the degree of relationship is what ties everything together, because we embed relationships into concepts. That theory of modeling, again, good for operational systems, works great for operational and in the 3NF world. In the warehousing world, we want to have natural business relationships wherein a new relationship arrives, we add a new one instead of trying to re-engineer old relationships. And also, if there's a natural combination of keys, we want to be respecting that combination of keys, right? That minimal combination to retain the meaning of the data we receive, or in this case, the way that the business works. So the NBR thing is huge. Once you have a concept or construct that's only relationship, it gives you a lot of power. But that's why this course takes a while, and we'll get into that. Let's actually jump into that now because I think that's important. Again, the agility, if you have an existing model and you have a new subject area that comes in, you can see here that we're just going to absorb the new area, right? And there's no impact. If you look at this prior little depiction of a data vault model on the right-hand side here, right? And when I add the new subject area, nothing happens to it because there is no re-engineering involved when a link comes and says, I'm going to read your key and take it and constrain it, right? In this link, I'm not touching it, okay? So the table structures won't be impacted. And of course, the loading from all the different sources that have that as a target won't be impacted. And then all the marts that read it, that need to pull data from it, and it's mapped to read that, they won't be impacted. So there's this, ability to build incrementally at the same time, right? Adapt to change, build incrementally at the same time as you're not doing re-engineering and we're not killing the concept. So this is how the re-engineering ends up not killing the warehouse in the long term because it's an additive kind of plug-in module, right? So how do you learn data vault modeling pattern? Because it is a different way of thinking, right? What it comes down to is data vault modeling, and it's hard for me to say this with a straight face because I've been doing it for 25 plus years, but data vault modeling is easy. Okay, I know if any of you are laughing, go ahead. It's easy, okay? However, it requires a paradigm shift, right? It requires us to do the deep dive all the way in, right? Students need to challenge prior thinking and keep an open mind. I think this is, it's a trite statement, but it's very true. Like it's really the thing that holds us up from being successful. Lectures, interactive cases, class exercises in learning are critical. You have to apply this to cases and exercises and work it in your brain to get through that process of that paradigm shift. So taking students from introduction to understanding is a process, and that's where we've been really focused on doing this now for pushing 20 years. We do a 3-day, and yeah, I mean, honestly, if you want to try to master it in a way that you can go home and apply it, your minimum is going to be really to do this. If you want to just get an introduction, a 1 day works, but that's all that's going to do is say, I think I know what you're talking about, but a 3-day instructor-led interactive classroom course, and we'll serve kind of like a mountain guide or a Sherpa as instructors facilitating learning. That's one of the things I learned when I was still at the university teaching there, was that this was during the years where we finally discovered that we don't teach per se, right? We facilitate learning, and the learning has to happen with the individual or the group that's working on the content area. So we need to really kind of see our roles more like, yeah, we're a guide or a Sherpa, and we facilitate learning. And that means through these interactive sessions, we're working together. We're discussing how and why this works and doesn't. We're having groups of students both build and analyze other groups of students to see what they did and why they did it. Question how it works. The interactive portion of this and the facilitated learning is really the critical part, I believe, to getting any of this to happen. You're not going to get this from a book. You can't just ask ChatGPT to teach you. It's not how it's going to work. It needs to be experiential for it to happen. Shane, you're on here. You recognize the last picture? If you're still on. Okay. So 2 weeks of online video lessons also start before you even get into class. And of course, you're not going to learn everything from video lessons, but we spend a lot of time and money on this because we figured that you want to get eased into this topic a bit. So for during the 2 weeks prior to class starting, you have access to a set of videos. I believe it's like 60 videos. I don't remember what the total count is anymore. Maybe it's 30 something for that and 60 for the full class. I don't remember. And then there's also a modeling case that you'll do before you get to the first day class. Well, this just means that when you get there, you're not going to be totally, in shock by what's going on, right? And again, the videos are not just a voiceover slide. It's a little bit more interactive than that. And they're pretty helpful. And you do an exercise, and then you have it ready with you for when we get to the first day of class, right? Then we have an exam, and it's a certification exam. Now that exam will, it's currently it's an hour, 20 minutes for the exam itself. Count on about 2 hours. You're going to be, needing to commit to getting it set up and going. But more recently, we've been doing them online, and you take it, after you've completed the class. The first take pass rate is about 68%. It's been fluctuating around that number for 20 years, or, well, I guess it is 20 by now. Yeah, I think it was 06. But so this is that's about what it is. But hey, good news. You can take it again anytime you want for free. It's just we're not an exam company looking for exam revenue. This is part of the course itself, and the idea is that you have a mastery of our learning objectives to the point where you can pass this exam. So it's really designed for those that are serious about learning it and wanting to know how to model. It's not a certificate of attendance, really. It's a pretty intense exam, as some of you that have taken it can attest to. And then you get your nice badge, which nobody puts on LinkedIn, but of course you can, for your CDVDM certified data vault data modeler designation. That's a good way to go. Okay, so more Q&A, because as we're approaching the hour, I just want to make sure we're touching on Q&A here. How do you like this ensemble and data vault stuff? What do you think?
Great. Let's see from anyone from the audience. Maybe we should start with William, as he's been asking for a few questions. William, how do you like it?
So with everything new, I see so many different links and opportunities. And obviously, little gaps that you've got to think about how you're going to deal with. And so for me, I have a lot of gaps that I don't know enough about. I remember doing all my modeling in 3NF and all the rest of it. So that I get. What I don't know is what I don't know. And for me, that's a challenge.
Yeah, yep. I think that probably sums it up pretty well, though, William, for a lot of people when you haven't done the deep dive yet. And that's again, it's an interesting place we're in, right? Because doing this for a long time, I think the stages you kind of go through in the training are an important piece to this. I mean, just honestly, it is. I mean, that's what we do, obviously, but it's taking people through. You think, how am I not bored or tired of doing this job after, a solid decade and a half of having a lot of this, but it's been 20 years since we started. And I think the thing is that it's always a really fascinating and interactive session to get people through all those stages. Not stages of grief, though, although some people are sad to say goodbye to dimensional warehouses. But yeah, exactly. But certainly the idea where the first time you see one of the pieces of it and you say, that, there's going to be too many tables, or it's going to fall apart here, or there'll be an unbounded number of possible satellites. And these things come up as a initial knee-jerk reaction. But then when you push through and realize, no, wait a minute, it's actually not an issue at all. It's actually better this way. And you'll have those kind of aha moments multiple times because it's a different pattern. So Anyway, it
How
looks
does
like another
this
question. Yeah.
How does this work with business analysts who are used to working with
William.
simple data models?
Sorry, William.
Sorry,
Yeah,
carry on.
Mind if I just go to some other,
Yeah.
and we'll come back to you.
Yeah.
I know you've got lots and lots of questions. Let's see, Petro. Sorry to interrupt. Let's see if we can get some other people going. Yes, Petro.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. I joined a little bit late, but I wanted to ask on, I think it was slide 14, where you showed that you can, or was it the next one, where you showed that you can probably do your virtual dimensions on top of your data vault. I can't now remember.
Oh, we didn't get much deeply into that topic,
Yeah,
but absolutely
I just,
great point. Yep,
yeah,
yep. Go ahead. Yeah.
there was a slide where you showed that. But in any case, what I wanted to ask there is, do you typically then in that view, in other words, that virtual dimension, so do you then use your primary key of your hub as it's then included in your view?
Yes. So yeah. So when you
So
look
you
at
use
the
that to link to your fact.
yeah, let's put it this way. The direct relationship between these constructs and a fact table is a little bit more nuanced, right? But the connection between these models of an ensemble and the dimension are pretty direct, right? So in other words, I think you even mentioned it, when you take your key from your customer in this case, and then you pull in the attributes
Everything else,
underneath
yeah.
that key. And what's
Yeah.
nice is if you notice from here, the key of the hub here is hub customer sequence ID.
Yeah.
The key of the satellite is hub customer sequence ID. The satellite doesn't have its own key. It only has the key of the hub.
Yeah.
So when
Yeah.
you roll those together, it's basically folding attributes into the key to create a dimension. And what's nice about that is that if you think this, I'm just going to make a statement based on a bunch of things we've been doing and hearing, but if you were to say that the average number of attributes per definitional concept that are pulled into a dimension for any particular business purpose is somewhere between 2 and 5. So your customer might have, I don't know, 168 attributes in total in an enterprise warehouse. But when you're pulling for a particular business purpose to a dimension, you're going to average 2 to 5 attributes that you pull in for the purpose of that MART delivery. And so likewise, something like only 7% of those might be historical, 93% will be current valued. So definitely create in an agile and fast manner, you're creating dimensions for your reporting purposes, and and folding them into a dimension is super easy. Now the metrics around facts are all stored in satellites. So anytime you have a valid metric you're using there's going to have to be a hub instance somehow representing that event or that connection where there's a metric that applies, right? And if it's not an event, then it's probably something like a count, right, or a balance. If it's a metric, then it's of course like a dollar amount or quantity or something else like that. So to construct your facts, you may have some aggregation of values to the grain of the fact you're looking for, and so you're summarizing at a higher level. So some of them might be more direct, like on a sale, you'll have a hub sale. You got the dollar amounts for total for that hub sale. You pull those into a sale fact, it's pretty direct. But if you're doing it higher level, summaries or whatever, it might be different. It makes it super easy. And that's one of the things that I think is fascinating too, is that it actually really helps, support your commitment to dimensional modeling if that's your paradigm for your organization. And so it really works well. So good question. And then somebody had asked about, the business facing focus, and that's really where the ensemble logical modeling thing comes in, which really is like a business mapping, conceptual modeling task, which is purely business users. And that's actually been codified now in the Remco book that you've seen. But the process has the artifacts that we have developed for helping to guide you through that, and also how an Elm workshop works, where you're working just with business. And I think there you find that, you know, if certainly a business analyst will easily understand it, but just a business user who's anti-tech will also be able to participate in these meetings and be very comfortable with how we pull those together. So I think, like I said, a whole other topic, probably one for another day. But the way I view it is that the business connection ensemble modeling workshops, really business mapping workshops, are probably what's going to be the most important moving forward. And again, because the nuance of translating that to a technical solution is going to become largely trivial, given that we will have agentic AI components involved that are going to be doing that for us, or at least doing the majority of the work in concert with us, orchestrating it. And by the way, that's not like this, hey, we'll look at the future in 5-10 years from now, it might happen like all the other things in our industry. This is more like we're thinking about it now, it's probably going to happen next month. It's like been pretty crazy lately.
There's one more question from Stefan. When your data vault is successful, how do you avoid having operational needs getting pushed into the data vault? So all of a sudden they want to solve business problems in your data warehouse and your data mart.
Yeah, that's a really good question. No, I think what probably ends up happening, Stefan, good to see/hear from you. I think what it is that things around operational reporting, and things like operational data providing that supports the operational things, probably do get commingled a bit into this architecture. It's probably hard to avoid. In a way, our I guess Mart stage areas get kind of rolled in, because if we can pluck data straight out and view it, it's kind of already there, except for the view that we create from it. So there's a little bit of more operationally oriented from that real-time business user connecting with it that's happening. But I think as far as system of record capturing of initial data, we're not optimized for it. I don't think it makes total sense. And embedding business rules with the data and the database itself, still, this is just my opinion, feels like it still makes more sense in third normal form. And I think we'll see the benefits of keeping it that way for quite a while at this point. But
and so I have a question. Mark Martins made a comment, and it was an interesting thing of saying that he's data vault curious, but hasn't had an opportunity to apply it. And I think that quite a few of us, especially when you're doing contracts, you do what the customer wants, and when you get to a data vault opportunity or not, that depends on the customer. Now, I remember the transformation of going from procedural coding to object-oriented in terms of going through that paradigm shift. And when you see it, you got it. And you typically won't go back when you know how to apply it. Now, if someone was to want to go on this course, it's not like, oh, shucks, if I don't practice it, then I'll forget it or I'll lose it. Does that, once that penny drops and that paradigm has been established, and you understand how to think, that you will be able to recreate that? I'm sure you can go back and write your exams or rewrite it if you need to, just to sharpen up on it. But I'd love to hear your view on if I do it now, and I only need it in a year's time. Then
yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. I think it is. I mean, you can only hope that you get the opportunity to flex your skill pretty soon after you've done the actual class. And of course, a lot of times people take it because they're already starting one. But no, we do run into this. People have, they took the certification 6-7 years ago, and they still haven't had an opportunity to do it. And you're going to atrophy some of those skills for sure.
Yeah.
And to get back in is going to be a thing. I was speaking for GA and Rempo's on here as well, is that if you are in that place where you want to get back in, we probably likely set up some videos for you if you want, and then also get a couple exercises we can give you some feedback on. If you're really needing to get back into courseware and the online stuff's not enough, you need to get cases interactively, we'll have to work out, can you get back in the class? We've had people that came back. There was people that took the course 10, 11 years ago, and they say, yeah, I think I need to take this again and get back into it, which definitely happens. But things like the videos and the case reviews, we can just provide you, and that's not a thing where there's any commercial part of it. So it depends on how much you need to get in it. But my guess is that, once you've had the aha moments of, oh yeah, this is how it works, you'll be reminded of them in short order, and it'll probably make sense.
Right.
But you're really not going to know it and the nuance until you start applying it. I would say that's definitely true. So.
And also before we go to William, to add on this one, I happen to have a call very soon with someone that he did the training before, and he wants to discuss piece of a case with me. Not a problem at all. Even if you did it, the training 3, 4, 5 years ago, say, oh, now I'm going, but I'm not completely comfortable or whatever. Just ping us, and we are happy to go a half an hour call without any problem. Of course, if it would really need to be coaching, then we're going to do different stuff. But then again, if it just, hey, let's do a quick recap, not a problem.
Thanks.
Yeah,
just
I'm sharing this slide real quick too, is that we have dbstandards.com. It gives you some overview of Data Vault itself. The Elm standards tells you more about Elm, but also has downloadable the guidance around it, and also the artifacts that you can use. And then, of course, the video lessons you can get just directly if you want. And then our courses are on the website. I just thought I'd bring that up as we're hitting the end of this here. But that's just some of the pieces. And then here you see it says info at Genesee Academy. If you want to reach out to any of us, it's pretty simple. It's Hans at Genesee Academy, Remco at Genesee Academy. Anyone else you know from Genesee Academy, just put their first name, and that's it to get a hold of us if you would like to do that. And then now just back to, we do have a class coming up. I think we discussed the 2 dates, but I think we're aiming at the 11th, 13th. That's a Monday to Wednesday coming up in May. That should be an in-person classroom course, which again, if we can do it in person in the same physical space, it's better than online. Online, we try to make it as good as we can. If you're desperate to get on sooner, there's an online class coming up in March as well. But certainly, I could recommend looking at the in-person class.
The cool thing about in-person training as well, that after class you can always go and have a drink with the trainer.
Yeah, fantastic. And the trainer loves that as well. The trainer really likes that as well.
I was going to say, it's not even so much that they want to be with the trainer, Remco. It's that, the trainer is buying.
Okay, the trainer wants to be with the students. Okay.
Yes, that's right. Fantastic.
Hey, William had a question, I guess.
Just one before William. Is there anybody else that, I know that people are dropping off quite quickly. Anybody else have a final question for Hans or Remco? Adam, anything from your side? Anybody else?
No, it's all good. Very interesting.
Right.
Thank you.
Fantastic. All right, William.
And Shane, you should say hello, though.
Yes, Shane should say hello. You can put his. Okay.
Is that working?
Mark,
Yes, William.
Thanks for coming.
So
All right,
with
there he is. I saw you for a split second there, Shane.
Yeah, technical issues as always.
Yep. No, I got you. I got you. No, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it. Yep. All right.
with every paradigm shift, something happens in your brain whereby you now want to run. You know, you're currently doing the walk thing, but now you want to run because, gee, this, you know what, this thing has really got bells and whistles, and I would wish I could do that. So partly towards Howard's perspective or statement of, well, it's not there yet. Is there a bridging set of concepts that you can start to, even though you're working on the current way of things, you can start to apply that kind of step change, even if it's some kind of a thinking to say, well, it's not just my thinking I have to migrate. I've got to migrate businesses thinking. I have to migrate other people's thinking to make it easier at a later stage. Is there anything that you guys have started in that kind of vein of thought?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think if you're looking at the team within the data warehouse itself, right? So you're like your architectural team, but also the team that's going to be building, maintaining, loading, sourcing, whatever the warehouse itself. You'll have to get those people up to speed on these concepts to make it work, right? Because in the long term, if they haven't gone through those, kind of aha moments and whatever, it's going to be tough, So I think that core warehouse team needs to get their brain wrapped around what's happening here with the decomposition to hubs, links, and sats, and understand how to use them and get past that they're not actually tables you own and all that good stuff. I think that's going to be important when it comes to the broader team, like from the business perspective. What we found is that the heart of this that we need them for is about core business concept, which are the concepts in the language and the commonality that they understand, customer, employee, sale, store, whatever, things that they understand. And when we work with them in identifying those and also the natural business relationship. So, the customer buys this product from this employee, whatever. They follow all that and they don't have to understand that the way we're embodying this is different from thermal form or something else, right? I even find that this kind of node edge CBC natural business relation discussion that we have with them is easier to do than it would be in concept modeling or other forms of modeling, because it really honors and piggybacks off of their own process and what they do and what they work with and how they manage things. They resonate with it in a way that I think is very easy. So I don't think, number one, they need to know quite as much of the nuance of the pattern, but it's pretty easy for them to work with you when you've decided to go this route. But again, the warehouse team itself, you can't really get around if they're going to be loading it, sourcing it, building it, expanding it, using it. They probably have to get into understanding the nuance of the pattern.
Upstream from them is your integration and your source systems, and of course the metadata that needs to that now may be a bit more exponential in terms of bringing across granularity. Right? Is that something that also needs to be considered?
Yeah, I think I don't think it gets more complicated. I mean, it's hard to put out. I think it actually ends up getting easier. And it looks like, Shane, I don't know if you're responding to this. If you have another question, you might be responding to it, which is great.
Yeah, I was going to jump in there as well once you had finished. So you finish.
Oh, no, that's what I was going to say. I was just going to say that, I don't think it gets quite as, it's not like it gets overcomplicated. Once you have the nuance of this way of thinking, it's largely by way, I believe, easier for that team. But certainly, yeah, from bagging and tagging a source and seeing how you're going to map that in. Once you get into that mapping to target, you're going to have to know the nuance of that pattern. So go ahead, Shane.
Cool.
Yeah, what I was going to say is the data vault pattern enables us to refactor our technical architecture to a degree, the way we kind of build things. So the modeling pattern itself is quite simple: hubs, sats, and links. There's lots of complexity when you hit the actual business data, as always. So that means that actually our code base is really simple. It's create hub, create sat, create link, load hub, load sat, load link, and a few other exception edge cases, which means we shouldn't be DBTing it. And what I mean by that is we shouldn't create 5,000 blobs of code for each time we want to load a hub. So we shouldn't have a set of code for load hub customer and a separate set for load hub supplier. What we should do is we should automate it, right? So that context of we have these customer data in source 1 and source 2 and source 3, and we're going to bring it over to a conformed hub. That context should be stored somewhere, and it should hydrate the code that physically loads those tables. And that automation is where we get a lot of the value from the data vault modeling patterns over and above the pattern itself. So that idea of context, right? That idea of business logic sitting outside the code itself that hydrates those tables, that's where I've seen lots of teams get massive value out of the data vault modeling pattern over and above the pattern itself.
Excellent, thank you.
And Hans, I'd also like to bring something that struck me about when you wrote the book in terms of the use of loading the data or extracting the data from the applications to start building a master data system. And what I've also realized is that it's actually quite a nice pattern as well when you start to look at the data quality of all of the different source systems. So if you're extracting the data from the source systems that potentially may load the master data, one of the first things I want to do is to say, well, what is the quality of these different attributes that are across different systems? So William, that's also something, if you know that process of creating a master data, this is also a very good way of bringing that data together and not dealing with each system independently. Comments from your side, Hans? I really like that idea that you had, that this is a great way of pulling data together that you need to consolidate.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I'm trying to think also with what you're saying is that you're tying this a little bit to these operational, well, let's say traditionally operational tasks, albeit enterprise, like MDM or, it's interesting because in the very early days, we realized that if you were going to write your own MDM from an operational perspective to manage, the quality of the data and the gold record data or whatever to use, you could use, someone had asked earlier, using Vault for operational purposes. That would be a operational purpose, right? To get this kind of master data management done, business glossary. And Vault works for that, right? Yeah.
So I'm certainly not suggesting that the Vault is the design for the MDM, but the Vault is a nice way of extracting the data from the systems, and then you've got branches that, I mean, it's that as if, I like that idea of as if it was in the same table, as if it was in the same golden record. And so we learn how to bring the data together and then focus on loading it into the different systems.
Exactly. That's a really good point. And I mean, I had this diagram I used once in a while too, where you have the org chart. And if you consider, as you go down the org chart, you get to where the rubber hits the road and you got to run the business, right? And when you're doing that, it produces data. And then at the very bottom, we're sifting all that data out and create this integrated view. At the top of the organization, we're saying, we think we see the, business concepts and their definitions from a master data perspective. And these two kind of feed off each other, right? Because, the idea of the master data says, this is what I think should be our concepts from an enterprise view. And at the bottom, we're saying, here's what really is coming through your organization, where the anomalies are. We can tag, like you said, these elements should be part of gold, these not, but also highlight where there's exceptions, right? And I think that's a big part of the job of the warehouse, is to say, here's a mirror of what you're actually giving me. And that's one of the interesting things that comes up in class, like if we have a sale and a customer on a sale, right? That's one of the areas in third normal form where you say the customer, foreign key from customer, right, has to be embedded in sale because there can only be the one customer under sale or it's worthless data to me.
Yeah.
So how can you have a link that's a many to many? It's going to be worthless to me. And our point is, well, guess what? We're not capturing the data. If you've captured data that shows there are two customers on the same sale ID, you're going to want to know that because you got to fix it, right? So we want to be a mirror to show you, hey, look, you got a problem here. So I think that's the thing is what's the purpose and how can we help to align, whether it be from multiple different sources or anomalies. I think it fits the original purposes of a warehouse to do that.
It's one of the things that's been challenging me a lot is when people say, we want to provide you with self-service. Now, the problem with self-service is, okay, I have no idea where this data is coming from. I don't really understand it properly, and I'm just going to grab it and stick it in my report. What I like about what I'm hearing is that you're giving this other place where you can store all your data, your business, etc., and you've got so, but you can pull and you're able to give these guys the ability to do proper self-service without making semantic errors.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I think you can get a lot closer to doing that in this way than you could probably in other ways, right? Because ideally, yeah, you're, one of the examples I use is kind of like when we're actually just day-to-day working and pretend you're not in IT, right? Your day is now consisting of like I'm writing loans for account holders based on this collateral and whatever it is. You're used to that terminology. Ideally, unbeknownst to you or in the background at your charge, data is being captured about that. And hopefully it's being captured in forms that understand that you want to know about loans. And the loan should have attribution around amortization and payoff periods and balloon payments and account holders. And then when you come back on the other end of this data stream, you're going to be querying it to get more insights on your business. And you want to get those, and this gets to self-service, you're going to be asking the questions about, hey, my loans for the last month, how successful were they when I was at this place with my APR given the amortization rate and blah, blah, blah. Your terminology and your concept definitions at those levels will be at the place you're going to use it, right? And so the ideal way to navigate the data architecture from point A to the final point where you consume it is probably keep it in that form, right? Instead of what we've been doing, which is saying, well, let's transform that to a party and party type and whatever with classes and codes, and then you code and decode it, right? And I always liken it to when we used to have to go through analog lines and we had modems and we had to modulate a signal and demodulate a signal. And of course, when we go to full digital, it just becomes fluid. And I think that's what we're trying to do here is keep it as close to what it is the business is doing. That's the way they're going to ask the questions. That makes self-service more realistic.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always said if business makes a mistake on self-service, then it's whoever gave them those little pop-up questions that say, or statements that say, this is a loan, and this is actually what I'm talking about when I say loan. And if you keep that consistent from source to target, you may have 5 different types of loan thing that are going to pop in, but at least when I drill down my data, I'm getting exactly what I want. And I'm not going to make mistakes in business as a consequence of the way we've worked with the data. So I like it.
Interesting. Yeah, good way to put it, I think. Yeah.
Thanks, William. All right, it's time to close out. Really, if any of you are interested and you'd like to join us, Remco and in South Africa, in Cape Town, we'd love to hear from you. really like to get as many people as possible initially, so we can say to Remco, let's book your flight and come out and join us. We'd love to have him here. And then also what Remco or whoever does is that there's a 3-day course, and then there's a possibility of having a round table or consulting 2 days where, you know, if you're already involved in data vault modeling and you'd like to drill down a lot deeper, then we can accommodate that as well. So
For sure.
thanks everyone. Thanks for joining. Thank you.
One other quick note, since we're on the course coming up. Yeah, May 11th to 13th. But keep in mind that you'll start gaining video lesson access in the last, because it'll be 2 weeks prior. So what's that going to be? The 28th or something of April, something, whatever the date is, whatever that month.